Welcome to the Hey Soul Sister podcast, where Mel Histon will guide you through life's big questions and bring you one step closer to doing this crazy journey as best you can.
Hey Soul Sisters, today is International Women's Day. Woo! It's a party in here. It's a day for all of us to join voices with people around the world and shout our message for equal rights, loud and clear that women's rights are human rights. Yeah, and so I have 3 amazing women in here with me today to celebrate International Women's Day. I have Nerida Bint.
Hello.
Hey Nez, founder of Lissome, Australia's largest women-only gym. I can't wait to hear from you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, Nez, you do amazing work with women, helping them with their confidence and strength and health and well-being. So, of course, we'd love to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure.
Oh, thanks, love. We have Miss Charlotta Thaarup, who is founder of the Mindfulness Clinic, international speaker and author, and my mindfulness guru, as I like to say. Hey, my friend Charlotta.
Hi, darling.
I actually struggle to navigate this world without her.
Aww.
And
you know how to say... I'll say the nice word, really, to flatter me.
I really, really wanted to do something to acknowledge International Women's Day for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because I suppose I see every day at Got Your Back Sista, which is a charity that I run, the impact of gender inequity, gender inequality, and the impact of really warped gender roles in our community. So for those of you who don't know, Got Your Back Sista, we help women and children who've escaped domestic violence to start their lives again. And really, people ask all the time, why do we have violence? Why do we have domestic violence? And a lot of the time, I mean, it's a really complex issue, but a lot of the time it does come down to skewed views of gender, the role of man and women in relationships. And the other thing as well is a couple of years ago, I was fortunate enough to go to Necker Island for a leadership retreat, and Alyssa Milano was there. Now, she was not the founder of the Me Too movement, but she was certainly a catalyst in getting it out there into the world. And she was there, and Mark Manson, who wrote The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And again, I found it interesting that she was very staunch in her views about violence towards women ending, which we all agree with, but she had I believe it was quite a simplistic view. And Mark Manson opened up and he went, well, actually, I think a lot of men in the world are really confused around their roles. Yeah. So because I love the 3 of you and I see you as such wonderful female leaders and role models in our community, I really wanted to come and have a chat about that in International Women's Day and a place of women in the world and what we think we can all do to support other women and end domestic violence. Okay, that's a big thing, but what we can all do to support each other in the community and make change. Choose to challenge, which is the theme for this year. So let's start with a bit of a chat. I'm going to put it to you, Miss Charlotta, first, my friend. How do you experience being a woman in the world right now?
I think that I am acutely aware that we have never had it better in many ways. I mean, there's things that make it more challenging, but historically we've never been more legally equal. So in that way, I think we're doing really well, and I think we've made enormous progress. I personally, I was brought up by a feminist. In Denmark, that meant that you wore a dyed nappy on your head. This sounds really weird, doesn't it?
That does sound weird. A dyed nappy.
Really, yeah, ideally purple. So it wasn't a used nappy. It was, and the Danish nappy is a little bit different. It's sort of muslin. Yeah. Is it called muslin? Yeah. Yes. So we wore those on our heads, which indicated you're a freaking feminist, right? But at the time, I was just experiencing it as being an equalist, if you like just equality between men and women. And so I was brought up quite, by and surrounded by women also who are very empowered women. So I suppose I've taken that with me. And then I came in and, I was married to somebody who was in the armed forces, where I was then the accessory. And for a long time, I was so acutely aware of what it's like to just be that little accessory where you're standing listening. You're kind of not part of it. It's not your life, it's their life. And I remember many years ago, I studied gender society and something else. And it was an amazing unit. And one of the lecturers said, that it's very clear that we used to have one individual in relationships and families, and that was the man. And he had a life, and everyone else was supportive around that. Now we're bringing in two people into relationships, right? Both want to have a life. And that's challenging because you have clashes and you have different interests. And I think that's a really interesting way of seeing it. So I suppose I've experienced it that I have choices. I've been very blessed, I think. And certainly in my work career, I haven't felt an acute sort of discrimination or anything like that. So I think I've been very privileged. But I am also aware that I'm born in a lucky country. I live in a lucky country. And I've also been lucky and I've had resources. So my experience, I know, is mine, and it certainly doesn't relate to all women.
Well, we have a special guest who's just walked into the podcast station. We're very excited she's here. The Lord Mayor of Newcastle, Nuatali. Hello, how are you? You can jump on for Charlotta if you like. So, Lord Mayor Nuatali, or can I just call you Nuatali?
Nuatali is completely fine.
Beautiful. So you are a woman working in a very male-dominated, like a man's world in politics. How do you find that being a woman in such a male-dominated environment?
Look, I have to say that it's getting much easier as I get older, and I've been doing the job now as the Lord Mayor for over 6 years. But I can tell you it wasn't very easy 6 years ago, this very pointed time. Some of it was probably gender-related, age-related. I was 38 when I was first elected. But having said that, I'd also been a councillor for 6 years prior to that. So I was quite experienced in local government. And I think I might have said this to you before when we've spoken, local government in and itself, in terms of the role of councillors, the average councillor is male in their 50s and from a white Anglo-Saxon background. So there is a diversity issue in local government just in general for councillors. So I was quite unusual even as a councillor when I first got elected at 32.
That is breaking the norm.
That is young as well.
I've seen a huge change just in the last 10 years in local government in particular. There's been a real push to have more women, more diversity and people from different backgrounds involved. But a council structure and a local government structure is a little bit different to the parliamentary structures in state and federal parliament. And we've seen a big step change, particularly in the Labor Party, because they introduced quotas. And those quotas filter down into local branches, for example. So that those quotas, and there was a big discussion of, I think going back 10 years, should you have them, shouldn't you have them? Women should, just stand on their own. And so there are mechanisms that you can put in place that sort of promote diversity, gender equality and the like.
So the quotas are, because I remember hearing conversation around that, years ago about putting quotas like women on boards, that sort of thing. So you would see that as a good thing.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I believe in the quota system, and what it does is you get that step change in culture much more quickly. It'll get it within a generation rather than waiting generations and generations, because the type of cultural change that we're talking about is entrenched in our daily behaviour. It's entrenched from its generations.
Yeah. So Nez, you, as being the owner of Australia's largest women-only gym, you are surrounded by women every day. Now, I only really, I suppose, heard of International Women's Day. I reckon it was only about maybe 7 or 8 years ago. It was never really on my radar, and that was because I think I went to a Gen X Women event for International Women's Day. Now, I hear about it all the time now, and it's very much on my radar with Got Your Back Sista. So given that you're surrounded by women all the time, is that something that you hear women talk about? First of all, that they're aware of International Women's Day, but actually talking about, gender roles and the treatment of women in the workplace or home?
Yeah. So we've been celebrating International Women's Day, I think, for about 4 years now. It's kind of been on my radar for about that long. And every year we open up both of our sites. We welcome not just our own members, but their friends as well. And we really try hard to create, on another level as opposed to what we normally do, but a very empowering day of them training and connecting and just really tapping in and connecting with each other. I suppose that's probably the only day that we do, kind of chat about that and what the theme is for that year.
But do you know what's interesting is that a few years ago, so when did you start Lissome?
We'll be 7 this year.
So I remember it must have been, I reckon, 6 or 7 years ago, I had heard about a new gym. Mm-hmm. And it was a women-only gym. I had never met you. I've kind of only met you in the last 2 years or so. Mm-hmm. But I'd heard about this gym and somebody had been to it and they were saying how uplifting it was and how all the women really supported each other.
Yeah.
And so I suppose I kind of see that and it is a really big step in terms of, you know, we're wanting to make changes and bring women's issues to the fore and wanting to make change so that women are viewed as equal. I'm like, we need to see ourselves as equal.
Well, do you know what the funny thing is? I always say, I'm the gym owner that cares the least about getting people fit. Like, I really don't care about getting women fit and strong. It's just a vehicle for them to come together in a space. And I try really hard, and we talk about culture all the time. That's all I do. And we create a culture where, people can, be who they are. They can be empowered to chase their dreams and women are it's funny. I've never really suffered from this. Anytime I've had an inkling, like I played a lot of sport growing up, and I think that really set me up to have real confidence in myself. So as soon as I started thinking about creating Lissome, I just did it.
Yeah.
But I see in women, they have so much fear. It could be leaving a violent relationship. It could be starting a business that they've wanted to start for years. It could be anything. And what we try really hard to do, what I've seen firsthand, is when women have a community behind them that will back them, they will achieve incredible things. And that's why I do what I do. I don't care about getting them fit.
Yeah.
I care about the other parts of their life and making sure they're living to their full potential.
So have any of you actually experienced firsthand gender inequity?
100%.
I thought you might speak up, Nuatali.
Well, I think I've spoken to you about it before,
Yeah.
but I have known about International Women's Day, I'd say, my whole life. I remember when I was in high school and I went to Newcastle High, I think I was in year 7, and we did dances, like, school discos, but we had themes, and it was an S theme. And I remember going, I'm going to go get dressed up and whatever else. And my mum was like, you should go as a suffragette. And I was like, wow, that's a great idea, Mum. I'll dress up like a suffragette and I'll wear green and purple and a big dress like from the early 1900s. That's a great costume. Oh, that's not cool. Could you imagine rocking up? Everyone's like, what's a suffragette and what have you got on? Yeah.
See, really, you were thinking Madonna.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm a future leader. This is cool. You're going to think it's cool in 20 years' time.
Yeah. So that gives you probably an insight into like how I grew up. So literally, I didn't know that everyone didn't know what a suffragette was. And then also, obviously, my mum had no idea that nobody else knew. So I did grow up in a very progressive household. So I had only a sister, so no brothers. And I was the eldest child. So I didn't have a context around siblings or male siblings doing anything else. It was 2 girls. And I had a very progressive father who would classify himself as a feminist, and I'd say a feminist mother. So I literally had no idea. And you'd think, by a certain age you would have some idea. But if you grow up like that and then you still, all your friends and your, family life and different workplaces were, pretty normal, like, how you'd expect them. I'm 44. And I remember in the early days of after being elected the Lord Mayor, like being a councillor beforehand as well, and not really having a massive issue as a councillor, just being overwhelmed and shocked by the reaction that people had to me being a woman and my age. I think those two combined tended to freak people out. And local government, in terms of a senior management area, it has been, and our council at that time, all the senior managers were men. Yeah. So if they said, what do you think about something? And believe me, I had some opinions of how to get things done properly. They literally would ignore me.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah.
I've heard stories about, I had a friend who worked for a male-dominated organisation. I won't say who it is. But she was on the management management team, and this is probably going back about 15 years ago, but she said that she was so excited to get this job, and it was her dream job because she loved this organisation so much. But I remember she said she would go into meetings. I think she was a marketing manager, and she'd go into meetings and she would get there and all the men would walk in the room and they would all go sit up one end of the big board table and leave her sitting on her own up the other end. And I think she lasted 3 months. It was, they would play these little mind games with her, totally disrespected her. And she was a smart cookie, but they wanted her to know that in the
she
whole...
wasn't accepted.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And she left really shattered because she actually really loved that organisation. She was a huge fan.
Yeah.
I think there's the very noticeable ones, even the ones where, you know, the boys go together to the bathroom and you kind of miss out on some of that conversation. But for the last 5 years, I've been running mindfulness leadership for women. And where we started was identifying an incredibly low self-confidence. And I think that low self-confidence that many women experience is an indicator of a system that isn't actually balanced. Yeah. So Michael Kimmel, who does a fantastic TED talk, he talks about how the day when he realized that he was a white privileged male, and that was when they were doing a tutorial, and one of the white women said, well, you know, I think we women, we have all fought the same battle. We've all had the same experience. And then a black woman said, well, I'm not so sure. And the white woman said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, when you look in the mirror, what do you see? And the white woman says, I see a woman. And the black woman says, well, see, that's the problem, because when I look in the mirror, I see a black woman. And then they said to Michael Kimmel, so what do you see? And he said, I see a human being. And so the further away we are from the human being, which is the white male, the more we feel there's something wrong with us and we have to compensate in order to be normal or to be right. And so, you know, I remember when my children were born, I had a deep shame almost of wanting to admit that I was a mother and that they took part of my time, because I thought that doesn't belong in the workplace. And that shame, I think still some have, that it's an inconvenience, if you like, which is a terrible way of experiencing motherhood, right? But there was that really poor integration and honouring of all dimensions of us, I think.
Yeah.
Support a sister and leave us a review whenever you listen to the podcast.
What do you think we do? I mean, the theme this year for International Women's Day is Choose to Challenge, which is really, I guess, to challenge those inequities that have become norms that have become normal. I'm like, what do we do? What do you think we do?
Smash down that glass ceiling. I mean, you just don't have a choice.
Yeah.
You make sure that you are supporting, you know, the sisterhood, and be very mindful of that, and making sure that if you expect to be treated in a certain way, that you're treating everybody else in the same way as well.
Yeah. And do you know what I think as well, you know, unfortunately, it does happen that because you know, in corporate world, in business, that those positions at the top have been dominated by men, that, you know, women have really pushed each other down to try and scramble their way or fight their way to the top. And, you know, it is unfortunate, but it does happen in that we kind of sometimes, we as sisters, as women, hold each other back a little bit, you know, and that's a real mindset shift, I guess.
But on the other hand, isn't that another oppressor for women, that we should be freaking nice? I mean, men have competed forever, right? That we compete sometimes, well, it's part of life. Right? Ideally, yes, we all stick together. But, you know, it's half of the world's population sticking together. That ain't going to happen, right? So I think we're very hard. Again, it's another way of oppressing women to kind of demand of us that we should be so nice.
I love you always challenge that stuff, Charlotte.
Do you know what? I think, you know, encouraging this, you know, habit of healthy debate. You know, women are so afraid to just have those tough conversations now more than ever. Like, with everything that's going on in the world right now, being able to have these conversations where you might hold opposing views or whatever it is, but still be able to, you know, kind of have that respect and love towards each other. And in a healing way, I think, is so important. Like, we just don't ever, you know, actually have those conversations.
Yeah.
I think women are so afraid of like pointing out, you know what I mean?
I have a lot of tough conversations on a lot of days.
Oh, they're terrified. Women don't want to do it. And then it comes out in other ways. It comes out in that. Yeah.
But interestingly enough, I grew up playing a lot of sport. So and I've talked about this before, although I have had these challenges due to gender and, probably other issues, could be political points of view or whatever it might be, I've had enough confidence to push on.
Yeah.
And that's when I say sometimes you need to smash down that glass ceiling. But when we're talking about work and what Charlotta was saying, the whole nature of work is a masculine construct. Yeah. The hours of work and, maybe COVID, I think it's been pretty tough on women's work.
Women's work, having to work and also homeschool.
Absolutely. And sometimes you have to have these conversations all at the same time, because it's not just about women, it's about all of us as human beings and what those expectations are of all of us in society. Because I can tell you that when you're a female in a leadership role, there is elements of emasculating people and men around you that you have to take into consideration, because you can't just strip back generations of culture and conditioning and expectations of behaviour. And I've had to be mindful of that, in personal relationships and also in professional relationships, because that all exists. And, then we should also touch on the superwoman myth. Oh, yes, you can have it all. It just doesn't exist. And if you do want equity and fairness in your society, you're going to have areas that compensate for that. And when Charlotta said she sort of, in her professional time when she had young children, I remember for a means to an end, there's internal ballots within the Labor Party. When I was still breastfeeding when I was first elected, my third child, there was definitely people that I did not bring up the fact that I had a baby when I was going to be running for council.
Do you think Jacinta Ardern's changed that?
I don't know if any of you heard Julia Gillard's talk, but one of the things that really struck me was to say that when she was the first, of course, Australian female Prime Minister, she had to prove that she could do the job. Did you notice that one? And then now Jacinta's the third New Zealand one. So she now has choice to really integrate masculinity with femininity. And I think that's where it's getting exciting. I think, right now we've got this whole really intense political discussion around victim blaming, for instance, all that's happening with the rape allegations. Thank you. And I think it's really interesting when we're challenging on a deeper level. We're going, why is it so that it's not as easy for a woman who's been raped to press charges as it is if somebody's robbed something from me, right? So if I get robbed, we don't go, well, you have too much stuff anyway, you're not looking after it properly, do we? Right? But we do that. So I think it's opening up for bigger discussions around this, and hopefully also we're seeing from Jacinta and others that beautiful integration of the feminine and the masculine, and that's where we need to be going. So that yes, there's still the battle to fight around men and women. Absolutely, we're still seeing 7.6% CEOs of Fortune 500 companies being called Andrew and only 5% being women. So we've got a long way to go. But we also have the other area, which is exactly what we're talking about, that integration of the feminine values with the masculine.
Well, I'm going to say this, after spending time volunteering in Nepal, and I've done that 3 times now, I go, damn, we've come a long way in our country, in our city, because when, spending time over there in Nepal, and I know there's many, many countries that are similar, they have such a strong caste system, but such strong views around gender, and really women are held as second-class citizens, and in some villages, it's
property.
Absolutely, as property. It's heartbreaking. And sometimes, I was reading something, and it was somebody, probably a white middle class privileged person, saying, oh, I'm not really affected by gender inequity. And I'm like, well, you need to go travel overseas. And really, because globally it still is such a problem. And I actually feel pretty grateful that to live in this great country, this great city. And as much as we do have a long way to go, I tell you what, we're a lot further along than some women around the globe.
I think the other points that were raised with the former Prime Minister, and she had a pretty tough time, was around education. And the way out of that for the first world, or whether it be the third world as well, is making sure we're educated. And that's not just the book style, school style education. That's having these conversations. And it's so pleasing to see that International Women's Day is much more on everybody's radar.
I know, it's great.
Yeah.
And for me, knowing about it and celebrating it for a long time, but seeing it really become part of normal discourse means it's not just one day, but it's one day to talk about these issues, keep the comparison going in, all different facets of our lives. And, I've got 2 daughters and my daughters' lives as well, because if you don't have these conversations, how will anyone learn?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Nez, can I ask you, who's been some strong female role models in your life and why?
I have to say, I really admire Michelle Bridges.
Yeah.
I think for me, because I grew up with such a sporting background, I was so used to being coached and being pushed and being kind of spoken to in a way that it never really fazed me. And then when I became a coach, I really noticed that a lot of men that I would coach didn't respect me in the same way that they may my fellow coaches, male coaches. And I remember Michelle Bridges was kind of the first person I saw in that scene that was, I suppose, maybe engaging more with that masculine energy, but calling women to a higher standard and having those, tough conversations with them and not holding back. And I just really admire that. And I admire that she's out there kind of encouraging women to get stronger physically.
Yeah.
Because I've seen it I see it all the time. When women tap into their bodies and they become stronger and fitter and more skilled and, they feel more capable in their bodies, their confidence and their natural ability and they're just, everything else just radiates. I've seen it 1,000%.
Well, then you're doing amazing work.
Yeah, I hope so. I say it all the time. I'm like, I don't focus on weight loss or anything like that. I'm always saying to the girls, just focus on getting fitter, stronger, more skills, happier, healthier, all those other things. And I think, coming from that industry, she has to be a standout for me for sure.
Yeah. The dear body, Charlotta. The dear body. What about you, my friend? You're an international traveller, speaker, author. Who would be a female role model that really inspires you and why?
Well, at the moment, I'm a little bit of a fan of Angela Merkel from Germany because I think, she has humility and she just gets on with it, but in a modest, common sense way without the rah-rah stuff. And I really admire that. I think, we actually need those kind of boring leaders because they're the ones that are not there with overconfidence and over-promising, but just doing the job. And I love that little story about her that the first time she went to the US and they put the red runner out and all the big cars, etc. She said, that's all fine, but I'm going to walk. And I think, wow, that's really something. And also in my personal life, some of my aunts have been amazing women, and close women. So they just did kind of followed their own heart and was still there with compassion and heart, but also bright and shining and outspoken.
Yeah. What about you, Nuatali? Lord Mayor of the city, have you had any female role models that have really inspired you to get to where you are?
Yeah, it's very close to home, probably touching on what Charlotta said around her family. And I think I mentioned it before. When I reflect on, how I am, maybe sometimes a little bit different to other people or, what has shaped me, I always think back to my mother. And we always have, interesting relationships with our mothers. And Mum was pretty staunch feminist. And not that I realised until later on because I just grew up like that. But she also was, very firm on education and, promoting education, not just for us, but for herself. So she would be about 75 now. So she went back and did a law degree as a mature age student when I was a teenager. So she sort of walked the walk, so to speak. And these days, 6 years into this role, which is quite a high profile role in the city of Newcastle with a lot of different challenges, and you've got a sort of a domestic life to balance, and people say, well, how do you do it all? And I'm like, well, my mother used to refuse to iron and also didn't accept any type of domestic gifts as an actual gift for a woman. Back in the day, you could imagine Mum's generation, people would go, oh, here's a new kettle for your birthday. So Mum was like, do never, ever think to buy a woman some sort of like appliance or domestic thing. That doesn't count. Yeah. So that's just like a little, Suska anecdote. But if you grow up with a mother like that, you do end up with I think a very different set of values and different set of expectations that probably has allowed me to be able to get through some pretty tough times due to gender if I flash back to about 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah. Do you know what? It's funny when I think about, do I have a particular role model that inspires me? I do. I've loved seeing Jacinda Ardern and what she's doing in New Zealand in terms of being a mother and even an unmarried mother.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
I
didn't
love
even
that.
know that.
Yeah. I love that she has challenged, I suppose, once upon a time, what would have been deemed as scandalous. I've been watching Bridgerton. Oh my God. Oh my
Rather
God.
large gap between that and
Exactly. So I do love that. But it's interesting for me. It's been many women that along my journey have given me little wisdoms along the way, or observing different women. So I would say both of you, to be honest, have and being role models. I can feel like a complete fraud, but complete imposter.
Well, you're not.
No, you're not. But both of you, in conversations that we've had, have said little things that I've remembered that in times where I've needed to dig a bit deep, that things that you have both said, and many and other women as well, that's really inspired me and it's helped me get through. I remember once I was talking to Nuatali and I was like, down in the dumps because somebody had been so publicly awful to me and I was just devastated, and how could that woman be so mean to me? And I remember talking to you and I said, how do you do it? How do you be a woman and be such a public figure and be attacked in the media? And you said to me, because I absolutely believe what I'm doing is right. And I remember you said that, and I went within and I was like, that's the answer. I just need to stop listening to that bullshit and actually go, what do I believe in? And what I believe what I'm doing is right. So none of that matters, And Miss Charlotte, oh my goodness, there's a whole list of things. But I go, I'm always learning and growing from other women. So I'm very grateful to you all.
Let's get soulful on social media. Search the Sister Code Facebook page and follow us on Instagram.
And we do learn from each other. And I think there has never been a stronger need for women who have heart and mind online to speak out. The world desperately needs that sane, compassionate voice. It's really needed.
I think probably the very high-profile person that I would often think about in that context, in a global context, would be Michelle Obama. Yep. I think she's played a really important role over the last couple of decades of being that voice for women, of sanity and that rational voice, and also lifting up women or anybody in that process that's been, suffered some sort of discrimination or disadvantage.
And not buying into bullshit. I love her when they go low, we go high.
Yeah. I have to use that quite a few.
It's a bit worn for you, isn't it?
Yes. I'm like, oh, here we go. We've got to roll out another thing for a press release. Well, we'll start with that, shall we?
Yeah. Absolutely. I tell you what, I have been watching Bridgerton. I've watched it twice now.
Stop it. Is there another reason you're watching that?
It can't be the script.
The lack of costumes in some places.
There is a lot of lack of costumes and a very, very
exciting.
Yes, band in there. But no. But I find that so interesting, going the role of women in that society. You talk about accessories and breeding machines. Oh my Lord. I watched that and I'm like, thank goodness we've progressed past that. And I kind of love that Daphne, the central female character, that she can see it and she feels kind of stuck in it, but she wants more. But she doesn't quite know how to get there. And I'm like, thank God we've progressed past that. 100%.
But also how confusing that is for men who might have been brought up traditionally. That when women are then so empowered and going, well, I don't really know that I necessarily want to get married. I don't know that I necessarily want to have children. I'm really excited about this. I think I'm going to go on a little trip. That's, when men perhaps were brought up to think that, well, what I say kind of rules a little bit. No wonder it's it's a confusing time.
Yeah. And that's the emasculation that I was talking about. And it's an issue for both, I guess, women to deal with in certain circumstances and also men, because that's the result of that. They're brought up a certain way or culturally exposed to a certain type of behaviour. And when it's different to those expectations, it can be quite jarring. And there's not any malice involved, but I guess people on both sides of that equation don't really know how to resolve it, what should happen next.
Yeah. No, because we think often it's personal and we forget about that cultural dimension to it, isn't it?
Yeah. And that can be that emasculating, I guess, behaviour. It's taken a certain way. I guess it's sometimes described in a more academic way as unconscious bias, particularly more if you're talking about in the workplace and the like, because it 100% exists. And we all have it, like the three of us will have it in some way, shape or form. But that unconscious bias does flow out, particularly, I think, in terms of gender in the workplace. But there's definitely positive changes, as you've said a number of times.
Have you heard this stat? I've heard that they say it will take 100 years before we have an equal society. Have you heard that?
That's around pay equality.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's around if you could incrementally get pay equality for men and women.
So, ladies, what do we wish for in the world for women?
Well, one thing that I've worked for a long time with this thing about, women in the workplace, and I'm more and more stuck on this idea of the importance of parental leave. So if I were to give advice to women who perhaps haven't had their children yet, it would be make sure you share the parental leave. The research is really clear. Per week that you do that, you increase the chance of you actually staying together, and you're setting yourself up in a really healthy way in sharing the responsibility for the home. But also it's a way to really shape things in a deep way, because I think now when a woman of about 30 is looking for a job, in the back of many's mind is, well, she's going to stop and have a child, Well, if we know that men are also going to take, and actually we realize that they are also parents, then both, it'll apply to both men and women, and that's where we want to go. And also the pay gap will also improve because both are in the same boat. So I think that that's one of the areas where I'd really suggest to women, really look at that. And the other thing would be to really befriend yourself, to be, to really be kind to yourself and be curious around the cultural input. And also even the thing, we've got such a masculine push that we must perform, we must be successes, we must be empowered, we must get out there. Well, don't worry if that's not you. If you want to have a contented life where you have a basic income and you live on that, then you go for that. Find your own, where is your bliss? Where's your contented point? And don't let anyone else tell you otherwise.
Yeah, it's about choice. And I guess sometimes too many choices, it can be overwhelming for people. But really, in what Charlotte is saying is it's about choice. So if you want to take on the world and, become the Prime Minister of New Zealand or run a very large global corporation,
go for it.
Go for it. And gender should not be a factor in that equation. But having said that, if you're equally as content to work part-time, raise children or whatever that might be, garden, go for it. Yeah. It's about having choice and allowing people to, follow their own very personal goals, completely regardless of gender.
Well, happy International Women's Day, ladies.
Thank you. And we have to hear yours. What's your tip?
Oh, my wish for the world?
Yeah.
Do you know what? My wish for the world is really about, and I think reflecting back to the time that I spent in Nepal, I really believe that education and people, the poorest of the poor, having access to education. And again, I visited some really, really poor villages there where there's no education except, tribal.
So no choices.
Yeah. And, and seeing so many girls exposed to trafficking or having experienced trafficking. I was really lucky that from a little girl, my dad always said to me, you're going to university. He said, you always want to make sure that no matter what happens, you can look after yourself. I'm so grateful for him that he was like that. We've got 3 girls and a boy, so he had 3 daughters to begin with. So right away he's like, right, you girls are going to university and you're going to get an education, and that before my baby brother came along. But I really believe very strongly, and I will say it actually makes me quite sad sometimes that in our society where education is so freely available that it's not necessarily valued, because it is the key, I believe.
And we are seeing more women now taking those longer educations than men, which will be really interesting in terms of relationship dynamics and all that sort of things to come, isn't it?
100%. That's going to be exceptionally interesting how that plays out, because more often than not, people will choose to procreate and someone has to look after them.
Yeah.
And that's where some sort of policy settings can come in around parental leave, around the first 5 years and who is paying for that education. You see really good outcomes in Scandinavian countries where that education is part of their national curriculum and provided to everybody. And you see really good outcomes for the children in those early 5 years, but you also see really great outcomes for gender equality in the workplace as well.
Yep. The only one, there's a really funny thing that's just come out, is that in Norway, of course, where they're probably the country that's most ahead in this area with parental leave, they're seeing a significant drop in births. Yeah. Right, because part of the reward is actually having time off. Or they can't decide. I'm not sure which.
Yeah.
But that's what they're seeing, which is really interesting.
It is, but that is sort of when you're trying to target education to the third world countries that you're talking about that will empower those women. Part of the payoff for that is the drop in the birth rate.
Yes.
Because they then have a choice. And really, that then ties into us as a global society having to ensure the future of the planet. There's only a certain size of population we can sustain.
Exactly.
So we're educating women, good for women,
yes.
good for gender equality,
good for the planet.
Good for the planet.
Yes.
It all works.
It all works.
Yes.
It all works. I loved having this conversation today.
Yes, me too.
Yeah. And do you know what? Because as we were saying before, it all starts with a conversation. I mean, I know that there are lots of events, there are marches, that sort of thing, but it starts with a conversation, and a conversation with your children, a conversation, with colleagues in the workplace, a conversation in schools. Conversation is one first step, but it's a really, really important one. I suppose we've seen that in Got Your Back Sista. Having the conversation, raising awareness is a big step, but then there has to be follow through.
Yeah, and I think that curiosity with each other is really important, because I also, get at the moment when you're listening to politicians, particularly around these rape allegations, that it's not necessarily malice. It could be, right? But let's say it's not. Then it is that implicit privilege is so clouding what they see. They see, they're just living out a representation of our culture, which is blame the victim, which is, la-da-da-da. And it's not their fault in a way. It is their responsibility to listen and to learn, like it is all of ours. But it does make it difficult for them if we are to see it with grace, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that is a really important conversation. I made sure that I watched Grace Tame yesterday do the press club address, and it was exceptionally heartfelt and moving and educational all at the same time. And, really, she's not asking for that much out of society. And I hope the powers that be listen and respond in kind. And there's some really practical solutions explaining the situation she ended up in Tasmania, which is just horrendous, and being gagged, essentially, because of the legislation that was peculiar to that state. Yep. And that education, again, was her recommendation as the key in her role this year as Australian of the Year, which is a very important role. And I think a wonderful choice, because there's 8 different pieces of legislation that deals with different parts of each of us and our human rights.
Yeah.
And having that inconsistency means educating people on what is expected of all our behaviours also becomes very difficult.
Yeah.
So really practical advice.
Well, thank you so much for coming in here today. International Women's Day. I'm looking forward to going to a morning tea this morning and having some great discussion on stage at the Lord Mayor's morning tea.
Yeah, it's
Lord
fantastic. Since I became the Lord Mayor, we've been always doing an event for International Women's Day, and we get, our Citizens of the Year, our Community Groups of the Year, our Senior Citizens of the Year together, and that's an opportunity for people to get to know them a little better.
Yeah.
And it's a really nice way to sort of come together and celebrate International Women's Day. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from Jackie Lappin, wonderful Janice Mesomici in Hamilton. They've got great stories to tell, but we also have amazing women working in council. I think I mentioned before when I first started, it was wall-to-wall men in our senior leadership. It's now, I think, 60% women.
Perfect.
Wow.
And two of our amazing women will be there, Julie Baird and Loretta from our art gallery and our museum.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Beautiful. Well, happy International Women's Day. Yes. I hope you have an amazing day. And sisters, let's all stand in solidarity today around the world to stand against gender bias and inequity. And celebrate how far we've come. Yay!
Thanks for listening to Hey Soul Sister with Mel Histon. What would help you on your crazy life journey? Email Melissa@thesistercode.com.